Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, or esteemed participants, and welcome to our educational webinar hosted by the International Trade Council. I am Anne, your host for today's session. Before we delve into our content, let's ensure our technical setup is optimal. Please respond with a yes in the chat box if my voice is clear and the presentation is visible. Let's take a moment for everyone to confirm. Okay, I believe that my voice is clear, or can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you for confirming me with that. Thank you. So today's session promises to be both enlightening and engaging, focusing on strategic choices, tackling the generative AI versus intelligent automation conundrum. Where's to begin? In today's webinar, we'll provide you with the tools to make strategic decisions regarding generative AI and intelligent automation for your organization. We'll explore generative AI's creativity in content and image generation alongside intelligent automation efficiency in robotics and process automation. Tailored industry insights will guide you, approach, and will help you develop a roadmap for seamless integration. Finally, we'll discuss how these technologies drive competitiveness and innovation. The session concludes with an interactive Q&A fostering collaborative learning. It is with great honor that we welcome Himanshu Kansara, the managing partner at, at Avenir Digital Incorporation, Dr. Yan Chao from Automation Anywhere, healthcare industry strategist, global healthcare leader, and Mr. Michael Guidry, Automation Anywhere, head of intelligent document processing, general AI strategy. So our speaker bring a wealth of knowledge and insights that we are eagerly anticipate. Without further delay, I yield the virtual stage to our speakers.
Thank you, Lady Ann. So I'm Himanshu. Thanks for the introduction as well. I'm Himanshu. I'm based out of Silicon Valley. Two of my colleagues, Dr. Chow and Michael, they are both in the U.S. as well. Dr. Chow is again based out of Silicon Valley. They'll have their chance to talk about their respective topics as well, right? The purpose of this call today or this webinar is to number one, equip you with a difference between how do you navigate Gen AI versus intelligent automation projects, right? Help you decode the buzz around what we call is a buzz and noise around Gen AI. There's a lot of buzz, right? There's a lot of noise as well, right? So how do you basically make sure that you get the right hand holding, right? So Avenir Digital is essentially uh, uh, expert in terms of digital transformation, and uh, and particularly when you talk about digital transformation, Gen AI, intelligent automation. We also do a lot of cloud strategy and enablement and data intelligence work as well, right? So, and we have three offices in the globally, right? We're actually having a U.S. office, a U.K. presence, and India presence as well, right? Um, just to speak the obvious, right? What's Gen AI? Gen AI is a set of algorithm that creates original realistic content, which is text, images, audios, and videos, right? And by now, I'm hoping that a lot of these audience that we have, they've used Gen AI in some capacity or some Gen AI tool to essentially uh, enhance, essentially bring efficiency and effectiveness into any other job function that they are performing, right? Gen AI is based on algorithms, right? And the algorithms are large language model, right? And it's based on huge quantity of unlabeled data. So essentially, the learning happens based on what's available on the internet. So essentially, that vast quantity of unlabeled data helps form a large language model, which essentially leads to a sophisticated text or images or audios and videos, right? Now, what's Gen AI? What's the difference between Gen AI versus intelligent automation? Okay, they are essentially synergistic, right? Gen AI is the brain, and intelligent automation is the brawn, right? And most of you guys, and again, I'm making a lot of assumption on this call, but everybody has tried some level of automation. Everybody has tried some level of AI, right? AI is not so much recent, right? Gen AI is the recent technology that has introduced, and it has changed business model. It has changed how human capital needs to basically be upgraded, right? It has changed, or it has demanded basically a sophisticated or upgraded infrastructure as well, right? So essentially, going on to the next slide, right? So let me start with broad understanding of Gen AI use case. Where do they lie? Okay, and I've taken some industries where it has almost impacted immediately. Okay, so Gen AI broadly has five capabilities. It can create, analyze, summarize, edit, and answers any questions or essentially when I say answers, it boils down to what we call is basically prompt engineering, right? So the sophisticated the prompts, right, you can expect a sophisticated response, right? Think of it this is the system would continue to get smarter, right, based on more data. Okay, so essentially what we call it basically it's a knowledge management repository. That knowledge management repository, the more it gets enhanced, right, it would continue to basically give you smarter responses, right? Okay, and just to draw your attention, right, where does this Gen AI impact almost immediately, right? When you talk about marketing, financial services, software development, okay, manufacturing, logistics, right? So look at this, right? So if you look at the green ones, right, some of the immediate use cases are to create marketing strategy inclusive of copy and images, right? So essentially, if you're looking to create a brochure, if you're looking to create a blog, okay, if you're looking to create a thought leadership material as articles as well, right? So essentially, that area it has impacted almost immediately, right? So marketing function, financial services, software development, right? And I can give you all the use cases. Like for example, let's say if you want, so essentially, this all function is essentially done by what we call as sort of a low end resource as well. So essentially, the resource doesn't have to be. So what I call is it has unified skills, okay, and it has based on the knowledge that's there, right? It has become so easier for anybody, whether it's an entry level resource or a very experienced resource, to create a similar and a sophisticated output. Okay, use cases of financial services, it can essentially create material that's readily available for reports, right? Earning calls and reports, right? Software development, it can write test scripts, it can write programs to do heavy duty, low, mid scale type, uh, 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 essentially. And then, of course, when you talk about manufacturing is very human oriented, right? So some of the area that it's not still impacted. So what we want to do is so essentially it has not impacted the. Like I said, Gen AI works very well where the knowledge exists. Okay, manufacturing, not a lot of knowledge exists, and therefore it is the lowest impacted area, right? When you talk about logistics, it's also a lowest impacted industry, right? Broadly, Gen AI impact businesses around three streams: internal, external, and innovation. Right. So when we talk about internal, we just talked about the previous slide. Just talked about marketing function, financial function. Right. So anything that's internal, which is marketing, sales ops, essentially is impacted almost immediately, right? And it can basically give you that productivity and efficiency almost right off the bat. Okay, and it's mostly around cost saving, right? So essentially, you can save 80% operating costs, right? A good example is call center, right? Um, Majority of the stuff basically gets done through a repository of knowledge that exists, right? And the agent basically can doesn't need a physical agent doesn't need to come into play, right? It can essentially a customer can start talking to through a chat box and start leveraging the knowledge repository that exists in the call center world. Okay, the second best experience, and again, this is external now, right? So we're talking about a virtual companion, customer relationship, wherever basically there is a personalization, right? So anywhere there is hyper personalization involved, right? That's where the business case lies as well, right? So essentially, Gen AI is a combination of people, technology, and policies. Okay, and then of course, Gen AI can be used for disrupting business models as well, right? How do you augment, or how do you basically augment a surgeon to do the surgery with help of uh, uh, let's say an augmented video, or a surgeon that's available real time in different time zone, different geography, right? So essentially, a business model can be disrupted as well. Gen AI has twofold impact on industry. We just talked about it, right? Right off the bat, we get productivity gains, and then of course, I call it efficiency and effectiveness, right? Um, so that's the twofold benefit, right? So cost saving, which leads to efficiency, which leads to cost saving, right? And then the value prop change, which I call it effectiveness, would lead to more sophisticated experience from customers, right? Where is the Gen AI impact of what's the degree of Gen AI impact on roles, right? And there is a high impact. We just talked about it, right? Some of the roles that are impacted almost overnight is marketing and advertising, customer service, legal. In fact, a common man like me, right, who is not legally sound or doesn't have a legal background, I use Gen AI time to time to write a sound legal communication to anybody, whether it's internal or external, right? I use it to basically use it for some of the test scripts as well, right? Some of the proposal writing as well, right? So essentially, the high impact areas are marketing, customer service, legal, software development, research services, the medium impact, right? So, and we'll talk about the timing as well. The medium impacts are finance and administration, human resources. Like I said, the overall impact for Gen AI is in three areas primarily. Okay, one, it has business impact, it has infrastructure impact, and it has human capital impact. Okay, and the limited impact, like I said, because there is so much of uh, data available. The data, when I say the LLM parameters that are available, the impact is high wherever the knowledge management is limited or still building up, right? The impact is low, right? For example, let's say operations management, community and social services, construction worker, right? And again, some of the areas it's already happening. Like for example, let's say you talk about manufacturing, let's say train systems, right? Okay, railroad, right? They are already using augmented reality. Okay, making sure that the human get the right support at the edge when it needs help. Gen AI benefit goes beyond cost. Okay, and we already talked about the efficiency and effectiveness, right? So cost reduction, operation reduction, right? And then of course the effectiveness helps in terms of enhancing delivery, right? Data driven decisions, right? Increase innovation and deeper customization. Okay, so some of the areas that we just talked about, supply chain, right? Supply chain, and we actually have a supply chain solution as well at Avenir, which helps in terms of a everybody needs visibility today, right? So, and particularly when you talk about supply chain, I want to find out, and particularly let's say when you talk about your clinical trial supply chain system, right? Number one, you want to get a visibility in terms of where the compound, where the shipment lies, which is going to the site, and it is essentially going to be used for cure of a patient, right? A patient that's impacted with cancer or any chronic disease, right? So we want to basically make sure that, so essentially one good example in clinical trial world in terms of supply chain, it helps in terms of basically getting visibility. Okay. Um, Again, enhanced delivery, right? So for example, let's say today, oftentimes we have found the call center to be available certain time only, right? But today, again, overnight, the call centers have become 24/7 and very effective as well. Okay. Um, what's the disruptive or defensible areas in terms of Gen AI impact, right? So um, the key impact drivers are in terms of marketing, right? Automated, creative and content workflows, right? Personalized marketing messaging, product visualization and recommendation, and automated internal reporting, right? We just went over this, right? But all I wanted to point you to is these functions, right, are absolutely ripe to take the benefit of Gen AI. Okay. Now, again, the purpose of this call is to, again, I repeat myself, right? The purpose is to help you decode the buzz and noise around Gen AI. Okay. Where it's applicable, where it can be adapted almost immediately, right? Where it can basically lead to what we call is hallucination, right? So hallucination is almost like what I call is it is very accurate, just like human, right? The output is just like human, but it is not authenticated, right? So there's a lot of data privacy and security that needs to be addressed as well. So Gen AI, it helps, but Gen AI is also dangerous in some areas if it's not adapted or implemented well. Okay. Uh, Again, what the impact, right? So if you are a digital organization, the impact is almost immediate, right? You can take advantage of Gen AI, but if it's physical, it's catching up. Pharma, manufacturing, automotive, logistics, hospitality, retail, you would still see robots not lying in the hotels that you would check in, the resort that you would check in. Okay, you would still see human, right? But it's still now it's getting replaced. I've seen basically robots and Gen AI. So, for example, let's say if I'm hungry at 11 in the night, right, I can at least call and I would basically get a response saying, "Here is where you can basically go and find food, whether it's in the hotel itself or close by." Okay, so essentially, what I'm saying is the digital businesses are impacted very almost immediately, and the physical business are catching up, right? So um, again, there is a graph right there. So what's the earlier impact timing in terms of earliest, right? So um, again, threats and plan to defend, right? I'll move on to the next slide. So what's the uh, time value cost in terms of prioritization of use cases, right? So if you see there is a if you see that let's say if you have anything uh, let's say your time to value, your value impact, your cost, ROI value levers, right? So the direct financial benefits, indirect benefits, and the success of KPIs, right? So uh, again, we can come in and help de- arrive at a sweet spot in terms of what's the time impact and cost, right? So essentially customer support, right? We just talked about it, right? 20 to 80% productivity improvement. Again, the number is quite high now. The personalized content, 60% productivity. Customer satisfaction basically is still catching up. The effectiveness, right? The agent satisfaction is also building up or catching up, right? Now, time to resolution, right? Time to response time, net promoter scores, right? So all these KPIs will derive what use cases that you should take on, right? And based on their time, value, and cost, right? So, and I'll lead you to some of the ROI stuff as well, right? Here are the value levers minus the expense. So we just talked about it, right? So Gen AI adoption or implementation is not it is costly, okay, and that cost primarily is impacted in three areas, right? One, your human capital. The second is the infrastructure, and the business model as well, right? So data readiness, application build, cloud and AI infrastructure, right? Maintaining. Now we're also like, let's say we just talked about the LLM, right? So the industry is already talking about multi-model as well, where text and video can be combined, right? Or image and text can be combined, right? So essentially, the ROI for calculating Gen AI implication is, here are the levers, right, which are direct financial benefits, indirect benefits, the KPI success minus the cost is the ROI. Okay. Um, Again, we'll have enough time to talk about the key takeaway, right? But I'll hand it off to Dr. Chow. He can cover the healthcare use cases as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Himanshu. Can everybody see me? Yes. Okay. I'd like to say hello to our audience from around the world, especially Singapore, where I spent my childhood. So, just to say something about healthcare, Gen AI has been the hottest topic at every healthcare conference I've attended the last 2 years. Why? Because it's the first time in a long time that healthcare workers have encountered a technology they feel can help them and not hinder them. And so it's been a very interesting 2 years. The pace of development is still very, very fast. But I see at least in healthcare, at least 8 categories of use case, which you see here, 8 boxes. And I'll go through really quickly. I've highlighted some of I think, the early use cases, but these use case categories are showing up and they're becoming very popular. People are starting to experiment with them. The first one is data synthesis. Gen AI is very good at quickly summarizing and making recommendations on complex collection of information. You can imagine if you're a doctor seeing a new patient with a complex medical history, it would take you 1 to 2 hours to review that chart. So AI can do this within a couple of minutes or even seconds, even including the 80% of the chart that's unstructured text or free text. So data synthesis is going to be a huge area for Gen AI. Of course, Gen AI is already helping with research and finding new molecules for pharmaceutical. Patient experience, very interesting. Gen AI can customize, I'll show later, customize the experience for patients in a way that was not possible before, even for any physician. So that's been very exciting. The clinician experience is going to be much better. The interaction with the computer is going to be a lot more human. And some of the latest research, a lot of startups doing what they're calling ambient recording, which is recording everything in a patient encounter without the doctor having to do any data entry. So that's getting a lot of doctors very excited. Operations, we've used automation, intelligent automation, and AI for a long time in the back office. Cybersecurity, simulation is an interesting area I haven't seen too many people mention, but Gen AI can simulate, for instance, an angry patient. Gen AI can simulate an older patient or someone who has low healthcare literacy. In fact, you can train the healthcare team to deal with these kinds of patients the best way possible. So simulation can be both on a human level, on an organizational level, very, very useful. And then finally, decision support. AI can scan the literature, the medical literature, recommend the latest treatments, vet any kinds of misinformation. In fact, there was one study published in July of 2023 where there's a New York health system that used Gen AI, developed its own large language model, and was able to better predict which hospital patients will die within its walls or be readmitted within 30 days of discharge. Things like that are getting people very excited. Next slide, please. Many major technology companies are now racing to develop medical LLMs to address some of the issues of the public LLMs. They're using techniques like retrieval augmented generation. And it's the same in other industries I've found. A lot of domain specific work uh, allows you to combine the public data with your private data without letting sensitive data like patient records be exposed to the world. So you see Google here, AWS, Microsoft, Meta. We have very close strategic partners with Google and AWS. NUHS, National University Health System, is developing its own in Singapore. A lot of startups, about 250 startups at the latest count. So a lot of activity, a lot of change, a lot of development. The situation is still evolving. So let's go to the next slide. So here are some use cases that are kind of interesting, and I won't take too long, but here is the first use case. The common problem is that the physician spends about, on the average, 16 minutes reviewing the patient electronic health record or EHR for every visit, whether it's 5-minute visit or an hour visit. And much of this time is spent trying to pull together and understanding the important pieces of a patient's history and not miss anything. So this task is even more difficult when the history is very complicated and there are multiple conditions, multiple medications. You can imagine if you have an elderly parent who has 20 medications, how hard it is to figure out when and where each medication was prescribed and if they should be even taking it. So in this flow diagram, it shows the requester and the physician. So the requester is somebody who requests a medical summary, whether it might be regulator, it might be a referral specialist, it might be for case presentation. But the process is that the automation can actually help the physician by collecting and validating and assembling patient data from many different sources, as you can see down there, the EHR, Salesforce, Workday, SAP, put it all together into a form and then submit it with the right prompt to Gen AI. And then the physician also specifies what kind of summary they want. And so you see some of the components. What's really interesting with this summary is that the physician can specify anything that's in any of the data that's retrievable. So, for instance, we can get social data, we can get online data, we can get all kinds of data that help to inform that summary for that purpose. And finally, the summary is entered by automation into the EHR and other systems of record. But we estimate time savings of 70 to 80% in physician time, which means you can increase physician productivity 40% or more. And this is given a universal shortage of physicians. Physicians are burned out, are leaving the workforce, shortage of nurses doing the same thing. And so we hope to reduce physician burnout, physician turnover, and also improve care outcomes because physicians and nurses who are stressed out and burned out doing this kind of sort of paperwork have been shown to deliver poor patient care. So that's a real big concern. Let's go to the next screen, next slide. So here's the data that I have actually entered into Gen AI. It's a complex patient history, only part of which is shown on the screen. Very complicated. My request is create a ranked problem list of the 5 highest priority medical conditions, a 1-paragraph summary of the patient, and recommendations. So let's go to the next slide and see what Gen AI did. Okay, here's the ranked problem list. It's correct. Ranked by the seriousness of the problem. There's a summary in 1 paragraph and several recommendations such as follow-up visits, patient education, medications. When I first did this, I was very impressed. Um, Something probably as good as well as I could have done. Next slide. The second use case is that 33% of physicians spend 2 hours or more outside office hours responding to emails and messages. And it's not spam, it's actually every message that you have to look at. And this, of course, takes away from family time. It causes physicians to stress out. And it really is not a good use of physician time per se. So burnout occurs in 63% of physicians today. And that causes, as I mentioned, medical errors, risk of malpractice, substance abuse, suicide, longer patient recovery, and poor patient outcomes. So in this uh, workflow diagram, you see that again, automation fetches the data curates it, formats it, assembles it for Gen AI, and then you submit it to Gen AI, and you want Gen AI can use these data and its training to actually look at the messages, the emails, and in a sense triage them so that it's instead of taking uh, 2 hours to go through emails, can you imagine a physician only takes about half an hour? Because many of the routine requests can be handled automatically, like requests for information, requests for appointment change, things like that. And you only have to pay attention to the things that are serious, and those things can also be filtered in terms of which things tend to be referred to the emergency room stat or can have a next day appointment and so on and so forth. So this is very exciting. In fact, when I talk to healthcare organizations and mention, what do you think about triaging email? This is the first thing they want to do: triage messages, handle the workload, get through the backlog. So next slide, please. So here's a prompt from a message, based on a message from a patient that arrives, let's say 4 o'clock in the afternoon when the clinic is almost closed. Dr. Smith, I had severe stomach aches since lunchtime. It felt like vomiting a couple times. I think I have a fever. What should I do? So the doctor asks Gen AI, submits this message to Gen AI and asks, what do you recommend? Let's go to the next screen. Gen AI comes back with a generic message, right, about stomach aches and fever and stuff. It's a correct message, but not really what the doctor wanted. So it's not specific enough, not useful. Next message, next slide, please. So here's a real question. And again, it points out the fact that you have to use the right prompt to get the right information. And there's been a lot of cases of people uh, not using the right prompt and then discounting the value of Gen AI because the answer was not good. So question is, should Bob go to the ER today or wait till tomorrow? And so next slide shows that, of course, Gen AI always starts with, I'm not a doctor, disclaimer, but it produces a much better response with symptoms that would indicate you need to go to the ER immediately. And so this just, again, illustrates the importance of the prompt that you enter. The better and more focused the prompt, the more complete the prompt, the better the response. Next slide, please. Here's the third use case, the after visit summary. We are actually actively working on a pilot with some major academic systems. The after visit summary, or AVS, is the piece of paper, the document, or the PDF the doctor gives you, the patient, when you leave their office or get discharged from the hospital. There are 4 issues here. First, it's been shown that over half of patients forget what the doctor said once they step out of the office. So they don't do the follow-up, they don't take the medications, and the standard AVS can help about half of them to remember. But the standard AVS, if you've ever gotten one, is generic and is filled with jargon, medical jargon. The second issue is the cost of non-compliance, which is from $5,000 to $50,000 per non-compliant patient, or about $100 to $200 billion a year in the U.S. in unnecessary hospitalizations and healthcare costs. So, what if you could generate a customized AVS that really reaches out to the patient and they can understand it and follow it much better? The third issue is regulatory penalties. If the patients don't do what you tell them, then and they get readmitted to the hospital within 30 days, for instance, Medicare in the U.S., the government payer, will cut all reimbursements by 1 to 3% for that period of time. So pretty serious. And of course, the fourth issue is time. Hospital AVS can take up to an hour of physician time. And you think about the number of discharges from an average 300-bed community hospital over a year. Conservatively, Gen AI can free up about $2.5 million worth of physician time. That's not a small number. And especially the more beds you have, the more time it takes to discharge patients, the more patients hang around and beds are not available, all kinds of issues. So next slide. So here's an interesting example I entered. Please generate an after visit summary for James, a Hispanic 15-year-old male high school student who was seen and treated successfully for asthma. Now, normally, if you print an AVS for this patient who was treated and going home with their family, it would be very medical, very very generic. So let's look at what Gen AI can do. Next slide. So this is a customized AVS on the first time around. Note that the section titled Important Factors in Hispanic Culture. Now, if you're a Chinese doctor or somebody who doesn't understand Hispanic culture, you may not understand that the family is very important, that the use of home remedies is very common, herbal supplements. In fact, things like the fact that salsa and chili can trigger asthma, those are the kind of things that you really need to know as a physician if you want to deliver the kind of care that is the best for that patient. So this is something that Gen AI can do very easily and very exciting to a lot of physicians because of that. So let's go to the next slide. So the patient wants another version. Next slide. Yeah, patient wants to generate another version. Go back to the other one. Go back to the slide. The physician wants to generate another version at the 6th grade reading level for the family members that need to take care of this patient. So next slide. So here's the result. Here is it can be easily read by the family. It can be easily followed. It can be printed in Spanish or Chinese. It can provide an easy to understand summary and recommendations. And the family is much more likely to feel that you get their situation, and they're much more likely to follow instructions. And again, if you have access to their location, even let's say where they're living, you can even add information like, guess what? The medication you need is at the pharmacy just two blocks down from the street, and you can take this bus to get there. That kind of customization is amazing and not possible previously, but possible today. Next slide, please. Finally, the last example is the explanation of benefits, or EOB, that a lot of health insurance companies send to patients. If you've ever been a patient, you've received this EOB. And with this workflow, what it does is it helps you to add information to the EOB that makes it understandable to the patient. So what does a typical EOB look like? Let's go to the next slide. Here is an EOB from Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. It's all numbers, a lot of jargon, and this is an official legal EOB. So I don't know about you, but if I got this, I think I would need an explanation of this explanation of benefits. So how can any patient who doesn't know health insurance be expected to make sense of this, right? So if patients don't understand, what will they do? They'll call you and then they'll dispute it because they don't understand it. So let's take a look at what we can do with Gen AI. Next slide. So what I did here was I entered all the data manually from the EOB into Gen AI. Of course, in practice, intelligent automation can extract data directly from health insurer information systems to feed the prompt. But I've asked Gen AI to create a supplement that explains the EOB for four things: low healthcare literacy, low financial literacy, 6th grade reading level, and explain the different categories of payment. So let's go to the next page. So this is the explanation that could go with the EOB. What it says are things like deductible. This is the amount you have to pay for your healthcare before your insurance starts to pay. Your deductible for the year was $700, and you've already paid it, so your insurance should start to pay for some of your healthcare costs in the future. So this is the kind of information that you read this and you look at the EOB, then you understand what your obligation is, what the insurance company says its obligation is, what the doctor charged, and so on and so forth. Very, very useful. Let's go to the next slide. I'd like to close by saying, of course, like Himanshu mentioned, this is an early snapshot. There's a lot of development in this area. Initially, the knowledge base for LLMs was blank after September 2021. That's being addressed. Data quality and veracity, like hallucinations and bias, are a big area of study for AI. Data privacy, security, standard of care. Are there medical, legal, ethical guidelines? The answer is no, there aren't. So it's still being developed. A lot of organizations today, including some that I belong to, are now looking at responsible, ethical AI and how do you develop the right path, develop the guidelines for the path going forward. Accountability, how do you measure ROI? and the cost of developing proprietary LLMs, which I'm sure will drop over time. Still, I think even in view of all this stuff, the future is very bright. And I'm fairly certain all these issues will be addressed pretty soon. But the bottom line is that the advantages of Gen AI are just indisputable. So I hope that helps you get an insight on what I'm seeing in healthcare. And back to Michael or Himanshu.
Thank you, Dr. Chow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Chow. That's some exciting use cases for generative AI, right? It's definitely making a big impact in the healthcare space. So I want to switch gears to more of a horizontal use case, and that is processing documents, right? That's I think a pain of a lot of organizations, right? It's been a challenge for a really long time. Me personally, I've been in the intelligent document processing space for close to 20 years now. And generative AI is making a really big impact on this space. And I think if you look at the evolution of this space and how we handle documents, you'll really be able to see here the impact that generative AI is having. The reality is a lot of business processes still include documents, right? Especially in the healthcare space, as you mentioned, some of those use cases include documents. We recently did a survey from some of our customers and found that roughly 70+% of business processes still contain documents. And in some cases, that's even paper documents, right? It's not just electronic files such as email attachments and PDFs and things like that. But if you look at the history of this technology way back when, right, it really started kind of in the 80s with scanning paper, right? Organizations were trying to get rid of their physical storage, and electronic storage started to become a little bit cheaper. So people wanted to scan those paper documents and be able to retrieve them using an enterprise content management solution. And that slowly started to evolve with what we know today of these intelligent document processing technologies. One, which is, for example, zonal OCR, where you extract data from a physical location of a document, all the way till the 2000s, where we started being able to extract data from more complex documents, such as invoices, other semi-structured documents, and things like that. But one area that we still have struggled a bit to address are those more complex unstructured use cases, right? So think of things like contracts or even complex invoices or sales orders and things like that. And that's where generative AI is really having a big impact in this market, in this space. So there's three key things here. If you could build out the slide, Manchu. There's three key things here that we are seeing our customers be able to address, and some white space use cases they're being able to address with these new generative AI technologies. And that first thing is unstructured data, right? So a lot of data that we get today on documents especially comes in as unstructured, right? Or even semi-structured. And what's great about generative AI is, unlike traditional intelligent document processing techniques, it doesn't require any upfront training or learning or model building and things like that. You simply ask it natural language questions, right? Just like a human would. You can ask questions about data that's on a document and be able to extract those specific data elements. And what we're seeing is that, again, these use cases that kind of struggled with traditional technologies in the past, we're able to address those more complex use cases using these new generative AI technologies. Now, that being said, this isn't going to replace those traditional technologies completely, right? They're supplementing technologies, for example, to be able to extract invoices. I believe that zonal extraction will still be there, right? It's still faster and cheaper than Gen AI, at least at this point. But what we're seeing is, again, some of these white space use cases, as well as being able to supplement some of those existing use cases or existing technologies, is really benefiting organizations when it comes to processing documents. Next slide, please. And if you look at some of those new use cases, across different industries, as well as it's kind of a horizontal. So looking at the healthcare space, for example, right, there's still a lot of documentation in the healthcare space. Things like patient records, explanation of benefits, claims, things like that. Those are really complex documents in a lot of cases, right? There may be some structured forms like the claims document, but other things might be, relatively unstructured. And we're seeing generative AI as being a tool that organizations are starting to use to be able to address some of these more complex healthcare documents. Even in the manufacturing space as well. So traditionally, like purchase order processing could be used to, or traditional technologies could be used to process purchase orders. But what we're seeing supplementing those traditional technologies with generative AI and large language models is it's providing a much, much greater level of automation. Right? It's almost like having another digital worker that's able to assist those traditional technologies in extracting those data from those purchase orders. But going beyond that, think of manufacturing, there's lots of other complex documents. You've got drawings, shipping documents that are typically unstructured, safety data sheets, other types of things. Right? There's lots of use cases across the manufacturing space that could benefit from using intelligent document processing with generative AI capabilities. And then finally, in good old finance and accounting, right, is one area I think where this technology is used the most. Tax use cases, vendor contract processing, things like that. Again, areas where we've traditionally, have either not been able to address the use case or have been able to address it in a limited capacity. These new technologies are able to help solve those problems. In the end, the business impact is really reduction of errors, right? Reduction of that time to key in that information into those core line of business applications. And more importantly, ensure the data is accurate and you're improving, regulatory compliance. Next slide. So oftentimes when, we look at generative AI and large language models, it feels like magic, right? And I like this quote here from Matt. Trust in magic alone won't make this work, right? We talked to a lot of enterprises that said, yeah, I've tried a large language model or even ChatGPT to help process my documents. It worked, but it didn't really work that well, right? It hallucinated. It gave me different responses of information that's not on the document and things like that. So what we found is that these models themselves aren't going to necessarily solve the challenge of processing these complex use cases. And to be able to do that, you have to incorporate these large language models into a trusted AI system, right? And I know there's a question about, how do we ensure, these decision-making processes, in this case, extracting data, how do you ensure that it's accurate, right? And that we don't just trust what, these large language models are telling us about the data that's on the document. And what we found is that, through this, what we call a trusted AI system, that when it comes to documents, there are 4 key components to it. And the first is that pre-processing step, right? It's not just sending that document directly to the large language model. Right? There needs to be a lot of work that happens behind the scenes to structure that data as much as possible and ensure that, we're sending just the data that that large language model needs as opposed to all of the data inside of the document. Second piece is indexing, right? So ensuring that, we understand what the document is and we give context to the model as well. And I would say the most important part is number 4. It's the validation of that information. It's that human in the loop. So co-pilot type interfaces that allow the human to interact with the results that were returned by these models is really, really important. At the same time, having a platform that allows you to apply things like business rules to be able to ensure that the data that was extracted is accurate. And as you can see here, the results kind of speak for itself, right? Using this technique compared to traditional, in this example, OpenAI out of the box large language models, you're able to achieve much more accurate results, limit those hallucinations, and again, ensure that data is valid against that business case. So one real quick example, customer example, case study, next slide, Himanshu, is KeyBank. So it's one of our customers. They're using this technology to process complex loan documents, right? If you've ever gotten a loan before, there's a lot of documentation associated with a loan. And also, some of the documents are unstructured, right? It could be bearing different proofs of income and things like that, or they're just random. And in this case, KeyBank has been able to use this type of technology to help drive, savings of over $5 million in their business. And ideally, in the end, focus more on, working with the customer as opposed to processing documents in this case. So Himanshu, back to you.
No, thank you, Dr. Chow. Thank you, Michael. Audience. So, like I said, Avenir automation. This team can help you essentially navigate that Gen AI or help you decode the buzz and noise around Gen AI. Right. We're all about amplifying human intelligence. Right. We're not about replacing or eliminating them. Right. So.
Mhm.
Thank you all for the opportunity and look forward to hearing from you.
I think Jason Evans had a question from the
Okay.
chat.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hello. Yes,
Okay.
considering
Hi.
the hello.
Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. So it's now time to address the questions on the Q&A box. And okay, so let me show the question from Jason Evans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, considering the ethical implication of AI technologies, particularly in decision-making process, how do you suggest organization navigate the balance between maximizing efficiency and ensuring responsible AI development?
I think the first step is actually to recognize that there is an issue. There are organizations that are jumping headfirst, foot first into AI without thinking much about it. But I'm encouraged because, especially in Europe and even in the US, there are now consortia developing big consortia that are going to discuss the proper use of AI. And one of the issues, for instance, is when you deploy AI, do you make people lose jobs? I think that's always been a concern for a long time. And we think back to when we first had the internet, that was the same concern. So it turns out that some jobs are lost, but new jobs are created. And so the question is, how do you prepare people with new skills to use AI instead of doing things directly? They use automation and AI to do it. So it's a transition time that's very difficult. But I think that there are a lot of viewpoints to balance, and I think that it's good to actually have a committee or group of people start discussing it because I know that in the US, for instance, in healthcare, the regulators are definitely discussing it. So it'll be a big subject for a while.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think having a programmatic approach to deploying this inside of the organization, right? We saw something very similar in the early days of automation, right? When robotic process automation, for example, became popular, it was, hey, we're going to put robot on everyone's desktop, and you just kind of blindly start to put it out in the organization. But I think what organizations realize very quickly is that you have to put a program around it and guardrails around it to ensure, one, the security of the applications that these bots were accessing, but also to ensure that what was being built is providing value into the organization. So you saw the advent of these centers of excellence, where groups inside of organizations were created specifically to address the automation use cases. And I think for a lot of organizations, those center of excellence teams are perfect fits for something like generative AI, because that structure and that model they put in place for automation will apply exactly to generative AI as well. And again, those guardrails, those security things, I think are already in place.
Okay, thank you so much. So we also have a question from Mr. Aditya Roy. Show this one. So how do you think AI can benefit sustainability, data, and design brand?
I think that's a very broad question. Sustainability, I assume that means ecological sustainability, or it could be organizational sustainability. But I think AI is allowing marketing and branding departments to actually create very interesting, very new kinds of designs that people have not been seeing before. So that does bring up the question of, what is a brand and how can you protect your brand in an era when everybody is taking derivatives of your brand? Those are really big questions. I'm not an expert in that area, but I think there's a lot of stuff to discuss there.
Yeah,
Very
no, I've
big.
seen one use case in this area around the data, right? So you talk about branding, you typically look at the visualizations, right, of what's being generated. But for example, in the pharmaceutical space, the data that you have as part of your packaging and everything else is really important as well, right? So ensuring that the dosage is correct and things like that. So I've seen, just in the document kind of processing space, being able to analyze what's on a package from a data standpoint to make sure that you're in compliance with all the regulations and rules as well, not just, the visual branding of it, is one application of generative AI, which I think is kind of interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, the other thing that you could do with Gen AI is actually design your packaging for different markets with a huge insight into that market. Like I mentioned with the after visit summer example, if you knew, for instance, that certain cultures and certain populations where you're marketing to had certain norms or certain expectations, you can actually design that into your brand and not make the mistakes that people have made in the past where they really fail with the brand. So
Right.
yeah, very interesting area. Yeah.
Now, even sustainability is very broad, right? Sustainability can be like, hey, I want to basically send my drugs from whatever, let's say California, over to Spain in Madrid, right? And what's the most sustainable career that I can use, right? So, for example, let's say, is DHL the right option? Is FedEx the right option, right? So you want to, so that sustainability is, like I said, it's very broad, and many use cases can be derived out of that.
Lady Ann, I think there's another question.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
there's another question from Mr. Kenneth Toms. So let me show this one on the stage. On reskilling as AI changes jobs, it's a political problem that the industry can't let politicians forget.
Hmm.
Gig economy is not replacement for intellectually skilled people. Ignore it at our peril.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's early days. So, for instance, you have the prompt engineering today, where people have to learn prompt engineering. That's the idea. That is a new career, how to question AI. But actually, I've seen a study that shows that a healthcare organization can actually build an inference engine to understand the context, where you don't even need the user to enter a prompt before the Gen AI acts on that situation. So I think we're just seeing the start of a sort of a new revolution in AI, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to the interface, the need for prompts, how AI itself can help us do that. So very interesting. Yeah.
So let us answer this last question. What is the normal practice and roadmap of integrating AI within my company? Should I hire a data scientist and code from scratch, or are there already fair frameworks from OpenAI, Google, Microsoft?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the kind of comment I made earlier around these centers of excellence, right? So, keep in mind these large language models, generative AI, right? These are toolkits for software developers, I mean, to integrate into different applications. So you've got kind of a buy versus build, sort of decision to make there. Do I build something from scratch? Do I fine tune these large language models based on my data? Do I do RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is kind of a middle, layer of it, things like that? Or do I buy a tool or a platform that leverages these technologies, right? Um, and I think, as I mentioned, these centers of excellence around automation are a really good place for this sort of technology because you can easily integrate these software development toolkits into these automation platforms and leverage those interfaces, those workflows, the process orchestration, right? The human in the loop example as I gave, right, with documents, to be able to integrate that into your business processes very easily without necessarily having to build an entire application from scratch, right? So I think the foundational models that you get from OpenAI, from Google, and things like that are excellent, right? And there's foundational models that are in some cases specific to an industry, like Dr. Chow mentioned with healthcare and things like that can be leveraged. But again, I think that how you leverage it, how you integrate that into your business, you really should take that center of excellence for automation mindset to be able to
Hmm.
to be successful in deploying that.
Yeah, and I don't think necessarily you should start with a data scientist, but if you're going to ask important questions that affect regulatory compliance or affect business model reengineering, things like that, then it might be worth it to get a data scientist. I have also seen a number of startups trying to develop dedicated, almost like no code, low code Gen AI solutions, but they tend to be very focused on certain problems. So if you're looking at a specific problem, you may be in luck. You may have somebody who's developed a solution for it. But normally, when we look at Gen AI, we think broadly, like it can be applied across the entire enterprise and that kind of stuff. So just keep your eyes open.
Yep. Changes rapidly, right?
Yeah, yeah. The one constant.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for answering those questions of our attendees. So before we conclude, I would like to share some important announcement for everyone.
Mhm.
So today's session has been recorded and will be accessible on the ITC YouTube channel for future references. Also, a non-members attending today's webinar are eligible for a complimentary ITC membership. Seize this opportunity to join our community. And also, participants will receive a certificate of participation post webinar. Please anticipate further details via email in the incoming days. So, do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share before we wrap up?
I think I think what I'd like to say to the audience is that some people have described this revolution, the AI revolution, Gen AI, conversational AI, all kinds of different flavors, that this is the beginning of a whole new era. And I would tend to agree. I used to be a skeptic, but I would tend to agree. Just like the internet was the start of a new era, so there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of opportunity, but the main thing is to try to understand both the benefits and risks and not be afraid of it. I think that's probably the advice I would give. And even looking at the industry is changing so fast that what we say today may not be true in a year or two. So, like I said, keep an eye out and just be intellectually curious. I think that's the best way to approach it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So, as we wrap up for today's webinar, I wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you to Mr. Himanshu Kansara, Dr. Yan Chao, and Michael Guidry for your experts' insights today and for all the participants who joined for today's session. I hope you find the insights shared valuable in navigating the complexities of generative AI and intelligent automation. Remember, as you move forward, keep your organization unique needs and goals at the forefront of your decision making process. Again, thank you for the participation, for all of your participation, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future sessions. Have a great day to everyone.
Thank you.